You're watching Moms Matter at EverTalk TV, and we are going to talk positive psychology today with Dr. Nick Holton right here at EverTalk TV. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So what is positive psychology?
So positive psych, the way I always frame it is to sort of juxtapose it to traditional psychology. So most psychological sciences throughout history have studied how to make miserable people less miserable, right? how to fix the bad. Positive psych is all about building the good life, helping people to move from either languishing or content to thriving, to flourishing, to sort of functioning as their best selves and feeling like their best selves. So in numerical terms, most psychology moves you from a -5 to a 0. We try to help people move from, say, a -5 or 0 to a +5, to really flourishing.
And that's incredible, because I think for the parents watching the show right now, they would love to know how to move their teens from a 5 to,
Sure.
move up from a content level to really thrive. I think in our community, with all the anxiety and depression and the stress levels of, really performing at a certain level, positive psychology may be the solution.
I think it can be in some cases, right? Part of it is sort of reorienting ourselves to different targets. So some of the things you mentioned, and we've talked about it before, the anxiety, the stress is coming from, I think, some misnomers about what leads to success and what leads to happiness. We've sort of had this relationship between grades and test scores and long-term success or happiness debunked. They really aren't that important. But then the question is, what is important? So let's talk about the sort of academic model for flourishing, and it's an acronym PERMA V, P-E-R-M-A-V. Positive and negative emotion. We want more positive than negative, but we still need the negative, right? Most of our kids turn in their homework because of fear, right?
That's right.
Unless they really enjoy the class, then they turn it in because of interest or because they love the teacher, right? The E is engagement, so deep immersion in activities and what's called flow, which sort of in sports terms is kind of being in the zone. Like you put your head down, you lose a sense of time, you pick your head up and you say, oh, 2 hours just went by, but it felt like 5 minutes. It's the time flies while you're having fun sort of phenomenon.
Okay.
The R is relationships, the #1 predictor of happiness, the #1 predictor of job satisfaction. The M is meaning, a belief in something greater than ourselves, community, team, state, country, nonprofit, whatever it might be. The A is accomplishment. So accomplishment does matter. It's just one of the 6 components. It's not the entire thing. And then the V is vitality, or in other words, physical health. So sleep, energy, vibrancy, nutrition, things like that. So that's sort of the holistic model for well-being.
That's amazing. So the messaging at home is huge.
Absolutely. 100%.
And sending the right messages to our kids about kind of what we expect as parents and what we want for them. And how do we then message to them that really what we want for them is to be good, solid, happy human beings?
That's right. That's right. And there's actually a lot to be said for the way they treat other people. And what you said is good human beings really matters. For instance, we know one of the big takeaways from positive psych is that acts of kindness is a huge happiness booster. It actually boosts happiness more and lasts longer than, say, buying something that excites us. And not only that, but it's a social contagion. So it spreads and it increases the likelihood that the recipient of an act of kindness will sort of pay it forward, right? So there's a big social component to personal thriving. And I think that has to be one of the big takeaways too. It's not always a me thing. A lot of times it's a we thing.
Absolutely. And you talk a lot about community and interactions with people, right? And obviously we know, our heads are down in our phones for probably 8 hours a day.
Right.
And us as adults and teens, kids in general, need to be interacting with each other.
Correct.
So how do you kind of teach that in a positive psychology class to kids about how they really need to be engaging?
Yeah. So the metaphor that we use is a metaphor from Sean Achor. And Sean is a psychologist trained at Harvard by Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, the Israeli psychologist that actually started the positive psych program at Harvard. Sean has 3 books. One of them is called The Happiness Advantage, which we'll talk more about. But the one I want to reference is called Big Potential. And Big Potential is all about how individuals, even though we all individually have enormous potential, we magnify that potential when we combine it with a team or group or community.
That's right.
And the story he tells is a story of fireflies. And the idea behind fireflies is that when they're flashing, they're trying to attract a mate. And when they flash on their own, in other words, to distinguish themselves, they only have about a 3% chance at success if they're sitting back in the deep, dark sort of recesses of a mangrove tree. But when they flash at the same time as all the fireflies around them, in other words, in sync, sort of in line in a team effort, their success rate goes up to 82%.
Wow.
That's almost an 80% improvement by sort of kind of being in sync with the people around us. And I think it's just a great metaphor for success, for happiness, for thriving. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a group setting, right? Community setting.
That's right, 100%. And then you said happiness. We all strive for happiness in our own lives. We strive for our families to be happy. Is there some kind of secret little recipe for happiness?
So we mentioned the Perma Model, right? But the question is like, how do you get closer to kind of doing or achieving that Perma Model?
Right.
So if we were to boil it down to say one or two things, the biggest thing, and people are going to know this already, it's mindfulness. You mentioned it. We spend a lot of time staring at screens and our phones. 40 to 50% of our daily actions are actually habitual, meaning we're not thinking about them. We're not actually always kind of in total control of our lives. And that can work itself out in some pretty ugly ways.
Yeah.
So mindfulness actually enhances, in addition to decreasing stress and decreasing anxiety,
Right.
right? It literally shrinks gray matter around the amygdala if we do it enough. So we experience less negative emotion. But in addition to those things, it also increases our attentional capacity and our sense of self. So we can catch ourselves in habits. We can catch ourselves thinking about the future or the past. Which, when it comes to adversity and resilience,
Right.
thinking about why the bad thing happened to us or what bad things we expect to happen next. Mindfulness can enhance our ability to sort of catch ourselves in those moments and start to process them a little differently. So that's kind of the magic bullet that underpins a lot of PERMA. There's other things as well. The negativity bias, which Dr. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for proving basically a decade ago. Two things being equal, one good, one bad, we're more likely to avoid the bad than approach the good. This is evolutionary. We have to worry about the worst case scenario.
Right.
But the takeaway here is that bad stuff sticks really easily and good stuff doesn't.
Unfortunately.
And very unfortunately, and this is where we come back to mindfulness, because mindfulness can actually help mitigate that adaptive process to where we can actually savor good stuff and sort of like download it or install it more deeply, but we have to take the time to do that. The bad stuff, unfortunately, we don't have to take the time. It's just there. So
Right.
we need to be a little more intentional and purposeful about kind of combating that bias at times.
Wow. I mean, you're like a wealth of knowledge. I want to sit here with you for hours. I'm going to come and take your class.
That'd be great. We'd be happy to have you.
Which is
Yeah.
incredible. We're losing airtime, so
Sure.
I need to say goodbye, but I love what you're doing. Thank you for spreading positive psychology.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
And all you mamas who are watching, Dr. Nick Holton, he teaches classes at Milken on positive psychology. You can go to his Instagram account, which is listed here, and check out who he is, what he's doing, and share the wealth with your families. We'll see you all next time right here at Ever Talk TV.